What led to JJ's diagnosis of AML leukemia was he was in the first grade, and he actually complained of knee pain and called the doctor, not thinking anything, that they would just tell us, oh, just watch it, give him a little pain medicine, but actually they told us to bring him in. They ran tests, blood tests, and they came back fine. But then he started having this loud snoring, and took him in, and they decided he needed to have his tonsils taken out, and had his tonsils taken out, and had complications from the surgery at home from the tonsillectomy. Took him to the emergency room, and that's when we found out he had leukemia.
So at what point did they decide he was a candidate for a transplant?
Actually, because his blood cell count was so high, he was a candidate immediately. The problem was there was no match. So we had to just do the chemo, but that was the doctor's initial response, that they wanted a transplant immediately, but it didn't happen. He's the only child, no other siblings, and he did not match me or his dad.
How were they able to decide to use his dad even though he wasn't really a good match?
Well, what happened, JJ was diagnosed in '06. After taking the chemo did work, and he went into remission, but unfortunately, after 1 year and on his 12th month checkup, he relapsed. And so unfortunately, it felt like back in the same position a year later, hearing the diagnosis all over again. And they started chemo again. Well, unfortunately, this time the chemo didn't work. So unfortunately, they did tell us, I'm sorry, there's no more that we can do. Take him home and enjoy him. And as a mother, that's just not an option. So after doing more research and looking, and we decided to try another hospital. And before he could get the transplant, of course, they had to get the leukemia under control. So we went to another children's hospital, and the treatment worked. He had a transplant from his dad, but that was the only choice. It was because he didn't match anybody else. We were it. It was mom or dad, and between the two of us, his dad was a closer match, not a match, but a closer match, and that was just a chance we were willing to take. So we went with his dad.
So were there additional problems with recovery because it wasn't a very close match?
Believe it or not, the doctors thought it would be, and their exact words to us was, the minimum he would be in the hospital is 30 days. He could be here longer depending on what happens, if he has graft versus host disease or any other complications. He was actually discharged 28 days after transplant with no complications.
So were there special precautions that you had to take to protect his immune system?
There were a lot of precautions that we had to take to protect his immune system. The biggest one for him was no fast food. No fast food. All meals I had to cook, they had to be eaten within the hour, no leftovers. I could not even get meat cut from the deli because you couldn't guarantee that they cleaned the machine before they cut the meat. No raw fruits that I could not peel. So it was a lot of precautions, but I must say we followed them all, and this includes drinks. So it wasn't drinking a soda, leaving it out, and I'll come back. If it was not consumed within the hour, it got thrown away. But we followed every last one of them. He never had a fever, never had to go back in the hospital. Did great.
So what were some of the challenges that you faced recovering from the transplant?
I always say when you're married, one or two things will happen. A tragedy brings you closer together, or it pulls you apart. Unfortunately, in our marriage, it pulled us apart. So through all of this, the challenges, me and his dad ended up splitting. For me, a huge challenge, because I was the main caregiver. Now that he is doing much better and he's back in school, my resume shows such a huge gap in it. And so the challenge for me is actually getting back out in the workforce and having somebody to call to ask why is there such a huge gap and not just assume the worst. So a lot of challenges going with it, and a huge challenge that parents have to know, and it's a must, is the recovery from a bone marrow transplant is a year, and you must give your child that year to recover and the body to recover. So as a parent, you give up a lot, but that's why we're called mothers and dads.
So what advice would you give another mother?
Always look at the hope. Always look at the hope. Always know that your child is your child. Although your child may have the same disease as another child, your child is your child. The recovery is different. The disease is different in their body. So just because another child did not make it does not mean your child won't make it. So only look at another story for hope, never for the defeating, only for hope.